I would like to first state the fact that I'm very pleased to be here and be able to speak a little bit from the point of view of the Kurds, because they are a very important factor in the future of Iraq. They have been a very important factor in the life of independent Iraq. In fact, there has not been a single minute that Iraqis have lived in peace thanks to the Kurds. And they will not live in peace in the future either, as long as the Kurds are ignored. And at least we have one presentation on these folks, and I'm glad to see that there is such a thing available. To follow the footsteps of David, I believe I should also wing it and try to present everything in 15 minutes, compact, about the Kurdish situation and the Kurdish stories in Iraq and in the neighboring countries. While we are waiting for the maps to be projected, let me just bring up to your attention that Iraq was and remains an artificial country. The name Iraq, the term Iraq, is very old, is very ancient in fact, but not within the boundaries that designate the present country of Iraq. Iraq is made out of four very different areas with four different histories, different allegiances, different religions, different ethnicities, different everything, in fact, different climates. To the south, the port of Basra and the wetlands of southern Iraq, they belong to the oceanic world of the Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, and they can easily be demonstrated their history is connected with the Indian Ocean, not with the inland Iraq or the continental Middle East, and in fact remains so for a very long time, all the way to the beginning of the 1800s, in fact. Basra's connection with Kuwait, Muhammara, and Falahiyah, and along with other port cities of the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and Southeast Asia is a lot more pronounced in history than with the inland Iraq. Then you have the real Iraq, that is from the north of the wetlands or the marshlands of the southern present Republic of Iraq to about the city of Samarra. Baghdad would have been a better boundary, but Samarra, why not throw that in? After all, it has a very semi-strong Shiite personality. After that, you enter into the district of Jazeera with a very strong Christian tradition that lasts more or less to the present day, that joins the Jazeera with Syria, Christian Syria, and still you have a Christian presence in that part of Northern Republic of Iraq. And when you leave the lowlands into the mountains, then you enter into a totally different world altogether. All you need to do is just watch your television and look at the environment. As you see, there are different worlds, different people, in fact. American troops will tell you to deal with a Kurd and deal with an Arab in Iraq is dealing with oranges and apples. Very different people. The connection of the Kurd with the Arab lowland Iraq is the connection of forced marriage, if you wish. And they remain so to the present day. So discussing the borders of Iraq as is drawn in Kurdistan is discussing a border forced upon a people who do not want it, did not want it, and will not want it. So whatever border was imposed upon these people, and to the present day they are fighting to change these borders. And how did these borders came about, that is what they have to discuss. In fact, to discuss the Kurdish situation in Iraq without considering the Kurds across the border in the neighboring countries is to create an artificial vacuum to reach a conclusion which would be satisfactory to ourselves and definitely not relevant to the actual situation on the ground. The connections between the Kurd in Iraq and Kurd in Turkey, Kurd in Syria, or Kurd in Iraq is a lot more pronounced to the present day, and in fact much more substantive than it is with the neighboring populations, say in Iraq or in Turkey. These are the mountain people. They live in the mountains. They have lived there for as long as history can remember. They look down upon the lowlanders, and I'm going to later on give you some words of one of the Kurdish leaders, Sheikh Mahmoud of Barzanjeh, how he looks down upon the lowlanders, as in his words, the lowlanders would use tricks instead of chivalry when it comes to settling their differences with you. A lowlander would lie to you as a habit, not as a vice. That is a lowlander way of talking, lying. You find in the highlands the spirited people who have the freedom of the mountains born in them with the mother's milk. We cannot deal with the lowlanders, and they cannot deal with us. In fact, in 1922, when he declared a Kurdish kingdom, in the district of Suleymania, as we're going to see momentarily. His words when he declared the independent Kurdish kingdom was that the Kurds in the mountains have only accepted the muhr of the Shah and the tughra of the Padishah, that is the seal of the King of Kings of Persia and the seal of the Ottoman sultans, only when it has been sent over as a gift, but not as a brand, to brand the Kurd as a subject of these two potentates. And they know that, and they have learned their lessons throughout history, not to bother the Kurd with branding. Kurd cannot be branded. And this is a spirit that you find very refreshing to an American who refuses to be branded, that we make our own future. And the Kurd, to the present day, believes they can do that. Pick any Kurd on the streets, in Baghdad, in Kirkuk, in New York City, and talk to these people. And you see the fundamental difference of the spirit between a Kurd from the mountains as they come and what Sheikh Mahmoud referred to as a lowlander. Lowlander who is willing to actually be ruled by the outsiders. If you can go forward 2 steps, please. I'm going to take you back a little bit. One more. To here. To the 1830s, in fact. Why 1830s? Very momentarily to stop, to show you the last of the independent and autonomous Kurdish principalities and kingdoms in the mountains. Very few of us even know the fact that the Kurds were independent for all practical purposes except for name. They did accept the muhr of the Shah and the tughra of the Padishah, only when it was sent as a gift to them. And these are the last independent countries in the region. For example, in the case of Iraq, which is the point of course, interest today, the kingdom of Soran, or a principality of Soran, they issued their own money in the 1830s. They had border customs service, and the British travelers in the region, they report to us that they had a flourishing economy independent of the neighboring territories, that the writ of the Sultan was not read at all in these territories, that they had even rejected the Tughra sent as a gift. This is, of course, the nadir of the power of the Ottoman Empire. What follows after 1830s is the steady increase in the power of the centralized government in Istanbul, thanks to the help that they were receiving from the European powers, particularly the rising power called Prussia, which eventually managed to create Germany. And that relationship between the two countries, Ottoman Empire, Turkey, and Prussia-Germany, has not changed to the present day. There is a social relationship between the two to the present day. And Prussia helped the moribund Ottoman Empire to come back to life as a valuable ally to the Prussian plans for the future warfare in Europe. And Ottoman Empire benefited a great deal from this. And Kurds lost a great deal from this event. In fact, the last of these Kurdish kingdoms and principality, when they were attacked starting in the 1830s, and the last one went down in 1848, it was not by the Turkish generals, but by none other than the person that you know his name, Helmut von Moltke, the conqueror of Paris in 1870 in the Franco-Prussian War. As a young officer, he was in Kurdistan at the time. He supervised, in fact, the bombardment and destruction of the ancient city of Jazira, the capital of the Bukti Principality in Kurdistan. Kurdistan was subdued, and now the Tughra was forced upon the Kurd as a brand. Ever since then to the present day, 2003, there has not been a single decade in Kurdistan that has not been an uprising and a bloodshed, non-stop. These mountaineers cannot be subdued except by brute force, and it lasts to the present day. Is a situation which is not brought about by the will of the Europeans or the colonialists or whatnot. It was there before the European colonialists, French and Britain, showed up over there. And it lasts to the present day, despite the fact that, of course, the colonial powers ceased to administer this area more or less during the Second World War, from 1932 all the way to the end of the Second World War. Of course, these countries that has been put under the supervision of the European countries, and I don't need to repeat those because you already know that from the presentations made already on the boundaries of these states. Next one, please. They had been divided and redivided in various ways to suit the interests of the Europeans, but the Europeans left. This is the earliest version of how to divide the region. This is the actual map, but I have colorized it for you magically on my computer to jazz it up a little bit so you can better understand the division. This is in 1916, in the middle of the First World War. And yet, of course, the Allies, British, French, Italians, and the Russians had already plans for what they would do to the segment of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, when they defeat the Central Power, which of course was premature. By 1917, they were at the verge of defeat before the arrival of the United States into the war. But nonetheless, when the war ended, this rather rigmarole, it is not even like natural, this division, as you see. Look how this place is divided. There is absolutely no relationship to either geography, to hydrology, to topography, to ethnography, to culture, or anything. Here you have to the south, of course, to the lower right-hand side of your map, the dark green is what the British thought Iraq would be. This is an old Iraq, if you wish. Lowlands of the Tigris Euphrates from immediately north of Baghdad down south. That is where Iraq would be. The light green that is with the letter B on that, this is the area that the British figured there would be some kind of independent Arab government of some sort, which would be a dependency of Britain. Britain would also occupy the ports of Acre and Haifa. It's a little, if I can do this, right there, as a part of the British Empire, directly under the administration of the British, and an international zone to include the Holy Land, basically, the brown area. But nonetheless, the British would get a direct connection between the Persian Gulf and, of course, the borders of Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea. The French would get basically what is today Syria. And in fact, the borders that you see on this are not very different. The one that separates the French territories from British territories, it is the current border between Syria and Jordan. It hasn't changed. Italy was given, of course, southern part of Anatolia up there. That is present-day Turkey. And the Turks were given the pink slip, basically. Once this is over, you get nothing. Literally nothing. You would get the district of Ankara and be happy that you even get that. All right, that may be taken away from you by your friends, the Russians. Russians, of course, were given the territories around the Lake Van and extension from Caucasus into the region. Russians disagreed with the fact that the French are going to be brought into these pictures, particularly pushed all the way into Kurdistan of Iraq. Why? Well, to the present Kurdistan of Iraq, they did not want to have yet another player in the Caucasus and in the region. They only agreed to this because the British told them, remember, we did this in Afghanistan and in the Pamirs. We are not supposed to have a common border, the Russian Empire and the British Empire. We would run into trouble. Let's stick the French in the middle. Nobody is asking the local people. Well, God bless his soul, of course, there came the good-hearted American, Woodrow Wilson. Come on, how about asking the people for a change? The principle of self-determination. In 1917 and 1918, the fellow American shows up over there to change the picture. Next one, please. And, of course, that leads to what? When the war ends, the United States, of course, has left behind a legacy of self-determination and the League of Nations. We did not choose to join the League of Nations. Of course, the Senate never ratified that, thankfully so. And the principle of self-determination became a cartoon, or should I say a caricature of what it was. Here is the outcome of the Treaty of Sèvres, by which the Ottoman Empire was going to be dismantled. And it was more or less dismantled in 1920. And it was, of course, the areas that are painted green over here, this is the areas which the majority of the population at that time in 1920 were Kurdish. The Armenian population had been exterminated by this time, of course, as you know that. Kurdistan that was going to be created is that little piece of land in red lines that looks like a drumstick of a chicken. Actually looks like a drumstick. The drumstick looks like that because, again, the British did not want to have a border with either Russia, now Soviet Russia, God forbids, the communist government, or in fact, a surrogate of Russia, namely an independent Armenia that was going to be created up there. So the British were going to create a Kurdistan, basically based on Diyarbakir, just a district of Diyarbakir, right there, as you see the capital right in the middle of that drumstick. But they gave it a tail. a shin bone all the way to the borders of Persia or Iran in order to separate their territories from the Russians to the north. So here is a Kurdistan is being created not for the Kurds or because of the Kurds or anybody else, but rather for the geopolitical priorities of the imperial governments of Britain and France, and in this case now the Soviet Russia has come into being. In the Treaty of Cerf was included the fact that the territory, the drumstick, would be an autonomous region. That is, it would be supervised by the outside forces. However, within 1 year, if they demonstrate their desire for independence, they would be given independence by the grace of the European forces. In fact, to make it even sweeter, the British included something which is kind of puzzling, that what you call today Iraqi Kurdistan may also choose at that moment to join this independent Kurdistan, that the Allied powers will not object to it if it actually came to happen. Why would the British give up Kurdistan? Well, why did the British need Kurdistan to start with? Why include it in Iraq? Well, good old oil, of course, the oil of Kirkuk. Oil of Kirkuk, you don't need to discover it. You have to be blind not to see it. It's burning out of the ground. Okay, it's actually on the surface burning. So it's when was oil discovered in Kirkuk? When God created planet Earth, I suppose. There is no reason for discovery. It still is burning today. The Iraqis used to put in their little tourist booklets the shallowest oil well in the world, which is 2 feet deep, and that is in Kirkuk. It's actually burning out of the ground. It's coming out. It has burned the ground. It is 2 feet deep, if you wish. And this was, of course, the reason. The British figured, why should we not have oil in independent Kurdistan as a dependency of Britain? We would have the mandate of Iraq, we would have the mandate of Kurdistan. So in 1920, there was no problem with having an independent Kurdistan. What prevented that was the doing of the Kurds themselves, and I have to go very quickly because I'm running out of time. The Kurds at this moment realized the territories that up there designated as Armenia, which by this time had the vast majority of its population being Turkish and Kurdish, very few Armenians left in the area. Now, of course, the Armenians have come back to give to the others what they had received in 1915 and 1916. Kill and maim and destroy the people and ethnically cleanse the region. You return a favor, basically. The Kurds in Diyarbakir received upward of 60,000 refugees coming from as far away as Kars and Ardahan and Mount Ararat, coming home with stories of death and destruction and ethnic cleansing in the hands of the Armenians and some Azeris, but participated in these things. The Kurds realized this is what is going to happen. Out of this great big area that is Kurdish populated, we're going to get the drumstick. And that's all we're going to probably end up getting, and we'll become a stooge of some European powers. Why not go into action with our fellow Muslim brothers, the Turks? They see they're losing their shirts as well. They're going to get District of Ankara and then nothing else. So let's actually join each other, join forces, which they did. The Kurds actually joined forces with the Turks, and together they created what you call the Republic of Turkey today. The Kurdish hero, and I put that in quote-unquote, because he ended up being the hero for the Turkish population rather than the Kurdish, was İsmet Pasha. General İsmet Pasha, that my colleague already mentioned his name, the hero of the Battle of River Sakarya and 2 battles of River İnönü, after which he was named İsmet İnönü, which became the Prime Minister of Turkey under Kemal Atatürk, and eventually the second president of the Republic when Kemal Atatürk expired in 1932. The deal was the Kurd and Turk would put their hands together and they create an independent republic for both populations. Well, by 1922 and 23 and 24, as the year passed, the Kurdish leadership realized that it's better its bread would be better buttered if they curry favor with the more powerful member of this coalition, namely the Turk. They decided to literally sell their own people. By 1925, when the Constitution of the new Republic of Turkey was written, no mention of Kurd was made. In fact, their identity was destroyed by the act of the Constitutional Parliament in Turkey when they created a country that is made by the Turks, for the Turks, and then named Turkey. And the Kurd does not exist over there. A Kurd that it has as much in common with the Turk as a Jew has with the Chinese. linguistically, historically, they have practically nothing in common with each other. To even propose such a thing as Kurdish and Turkish as related, it is preposterous. I mean, in the European language versus an Asiatic Altaic language. But nonetheless, the Kurds themselves went into work to present Turkish as a Turkic language. A person by the name Shukru Mehmet Sekban, who became the chief of propaganda of the new republic, he wrote books and chapters and verse to prove that the Kurd is a Turk, and the Kurdish language is Turkish. This is on the Turkish side of the border, and this rigmarole continued on. What happened was, now that the Kurd in Turkey, what is today Turkey, has gone into cahoots with the Turk, British no longer look favorably upon an independent Kurdistan. Now the Kurdistan, that portion of it, which is a certain section, was going to be incorporated into Iraq, and it was. It was by the British, and of course the British had a hell of a time trying to make the local Kurds in what is called today Iraq to understand and accept this, which of course they did not. From the moment that they started to forcefully incorporate the Kurds into Iraq, and my esteemed colleague earlier mentioned as early as 1919, air power was used over the Kurds, not just on Iraqi Kurds, but on Iranian Kurds as well. In fact, in 1919, the British Air Force bombed the village of Zamkhan in the Sanjabi district of Iran, the hometown of future Karim Sanjabi, the head of the National Front, the political party in Iran that, of course, he took over after the death of Prime Minister Mossadegh. He tells of his childhood, that how he perceived the bombardment of the region by the British Air Force. The British now, they had to force upon the Kurds in Iraq that they have to be incorporated into Iraq. It was no willingness on their part, and the willingness has never been there. Today we are facing with a problem which is not either new or novel, nor is it of the making of the outside forces. You can say, well, the British forcefully incorporated the Kurdistan of Iraq into Iraqi state. Yes, well, they forcefully also put the Jazeera region into Iraq region and the Gulf region into Iraq region. But these areas have much in common with one another. Kurdistan does not. And today, the American military has to pick up where the other Europeans and the local powers have left behind. That is, to convince the Kurd that it is good to remain part of Iraq. It seems that the present leadership of Iraqi Kurdistans are willing to play the game with us, to extend this unwilling marriage, the forced marriage between the lowlanders and the upperlanders for the foreseeable future. That we are thinking of a federal Iraq, that Kurdistan would be a federally portion of the Iraq, but I'm not quite sure if it will work.